I lost my family on a rainy Tuesday morning, sitting in the driver's seat of my car while a maintenance worker unscrewed my mother's name from a brick wall. The metal drill whined over the heavy sound of traffic. Two thick brass screws hit the concrete pavement with a sharp clink. The reporters waiting outside the iron gates of Safe Beginnings shifted their umbrellas, and the damp smell of wet asphalt crept through my cracked window. Sienna sat in the passenger seat next to me. She traced her thumb over the rigid, yellowed plastic of an old hospital infant bracelet. The plastic edges were sharp, biting into her skin. "Is it really over?" Sienna asked. Her voice shook, barely louder than the rain hitting the windshield. I watched the heavy brass letters of Carol Whitmore drop into a cardboard box. Everything began with the birthday dinner my mother claimed she planned for me. 8 months earlier, I stood in the bright hallway of the community hospital where I worked as the director of patient compliance. I had just spent 4 hours mediating a privacy violation complaint. My neck throbbed. I rubbed the tight muscle at the base of my skull, craving the quiet of the townhouse I had bought with my own money. I dealt with rules, evidence, and strict boundaries for a living. I needed order. I drove home, locked my work files in my fireproof safe, and checked my phone. One new message glared from the screen. "Don't be late. Mom invited people who matter." Sienna never bothered with a greeting. She was 23, 15 years younger than me, and lived entirely in a world our mother had built for her. I set the phone on the granite counter. The cold stone chilled my fingertips. Today was my 38th birthday. My mother had insisted on a private room at a historic downtown restaurant to celebrate, but Sienna's text confirmed what I already knew. This was not a birthday party. It was a social performance. The private dining room smelled of melting beeswax candles and roasted duck. Crystal wine glasses clinked over the low hum of expensive conversations. Our mother had invited 3 board members from Safe Beginnings and 2 major donors. I sat at the end of the long mahogany table. My mother sat at the center, holding court. She wore a tailored navy blazer, her smile practiced and warm. "We are just so proud of Sienna's new outreach campaign," my mother told a donor, resting her hand over Sienna's. "She really has a gift for connecting with these young women." Sienna beamed. She wore a silk dress our mother had bought her. She accepted the praise with practiced grace. I drank my water, letting the ice rattle against the glass. I had spent 6 hours rewriting that entire campaign proposal over a weekend. The timestamp on the email I sent Sienna was still saved in my inbox. I did not mention it. I never did. My mother leaned forward, lowering her voice to that intimate pitch she used to draw people in. "You know, after I had Leah, William and I struggled for so long," she said, gesturing vaguely in my direction. "Secondary infertility. It was a dark time. But then, we found Sienna. A young teenage girl gave her up, and we were chosen to take her in." The donors nodded, their eyes softening with admiration. It was the same story, polished over 2 decades. Safe Beginnings, the local charity my mother founded, was built entirely on this narrative. "Sienna was our chosen child," my mother continued. She did not say the next part out loud, but the implication hung heavy in the warm air. If Sienna was the chosen child, I was the obligation. I was the difficult, cold, older sister who preferred reviewing hospital regulations over family bonding. I glanced at my father. William sat next to my mother, staring at his half-empty wine glass. He did not speak. He rarely did when my mother held the room. Dessert arrived. The waiters cleared the main courses. Sienna reached into her designer purse and pulled out a small rectangular cardboard box. She slid it across the mahogany table. The rough cardboard scraped against the polished wood. It stopped right in front of my plate. An at-home DNA testing kit. The conversation around the table died. The silence felt thick, suffocating. "What is this?" I asked, keeping my voice level. Sienna leaned back and crossed her arms. "You're just another man's mistake," she sneered. "Let's prove it." The air vanished from my lungs. I looked at my mother. Carol did not gasp. She did not reprimand Sienna. Instead, the corner of her mouth twitched upward. She smirked. My stomach tightened. My mother had orchestrated this. She had brought the donors here to watch me break. She expected me to react like the 15-year-old girl she used to control. She wanted me to cry, to scream, or to run away, making myself look unstable in front of her board members. I turned to my father. He kept his eyes fixed on the tablecloth. Dad said nothing. His silence was a choice. I reached out and placed my hand flat on the cardboard box. I did not open it. I did not throw it back. I looked directly at Sienna, then at my mother. "I don't perform family theater for an audience," I said. My voice was steady. I picked up the box, slid it into my leather tote bag, and pushed my chair back. The wooden legs groaned against the carpet. I nodded to the donors, wished them a good evening, and walked out of the restaurant. My chest ached with the effort of keeping my posture straight, but I did not let them see me rush. Sienna probably thought I was terrified. My mother probably thought her plan had worked perfectly. I reached my car and started the engine. The heater blasted against my cold hands. As I pulled out of the parking lot, my phone rang through the car's speakers. It was my mother. I let it ring 3 times before I answered. "You didn't activate that kit, did you?" my mother asked. She did not ask if I was okay. She did not apologize for Sienna. Her voice was sharp, tight, with an anxiety I had not heard before. She sounded panicked. "I have to drive," I said, and ended the call. I parked in my driveway a few minutes later. The engine clicked as it cooled down. I stared at the passenger seat. The small cardboard box sat under the streetlight filtering through the window. My mother wanted to humiliate me. She wanted everyone to think I was a mistake, but her phone call told a different story. For the first time, I wondered what my mother was afraid it might find. The keypad on my fireproof safe beeped as I entered the code, and the heavy steel door clicked open, breaking the silence of my empty townhouse. Inside, tucked behind my property deed and passport, sat a thick manila envelope. The label read medical history in my own neat handwriting. I pulled the envelope out and carried it to the kitchen island. The overhead pendant lights cast a sharp glow on the granite counter. Flipping open the cover revealed years of quiet, meticulous work. Hospital admission forms, printed emails, and faded invoices sat neatly organized alongside pages of handwritten notes documenting every conflicting story my parents had ever told me. I had not started investigating my family tonight after the birthday dinner. The foundation for my doubts had been laid a long time ago. Touching the oldest document in the stack always brought back the smell. Bleach and iodine. The scratch of stiff cotton sheets against my bare legs. 23 years disappeared, and I was 15 again, lying in a narrow bed at a maternity residence 3 states away from home. A sharp, brief wail pierced the sterile air, then heavy hands pressed my shoulders flat against the mattress. My mother leaned over me. The baby did not make it. Her voice was perfectly calm. I squeezed my eyes shut, forcing the memory away, and focused on the paper in front of me to stop my hands from shaking. It was a discharge summary from the clinic. Halfway down the page, typed in faded black ink, sat 5 words. Live female infant transferred. There was no death certificate. I had asked for one when I turned 18, but my mother claimed the receiving hospital lost the records during a system upgrade. When I pushed harder, my father pulled me aside into the hallway. "Stop making your mother relive that pain," William had told me. He looked at the floor when he said it, never meeting my eyes. Another piece of paper sat beneath the discharge summary. A faded invoice from a law firm dated 6 weeks after my delivery. The description of services read relative placement consultation. My father had paid it from his personal checking account. A photograph slipped out from between the medical bills. Sienna at 4 years old, sitting on my parents' living room rug. I picked up the glossy square. The little girl in the picture had the exact same uneven hairline I did, and she was biting the inside of her cheek, a nervous habit we shared. A deep, terrifying guilt washed over me. I had always assumed I was projecting. When my parents brought Sienna home and announced she was a private adoption, I had practically raised her. Rocking her to sleep brought me a quiet peace. For years, I believed I was just using my new adopted sister to replace the child I lost. Every time I pointed out a similarity between us, my mother would snap at me. She told me not to turn my sister into a replacement for the baby I could not save. My phone vibrated against the granite counter, shattering the quiet. Carol Whitmore. I answered on the third ring. Hello. Those companies are completely unreliable, my mother said without a greeting. They sell your data to insurance firms. Did you register an account yet? No. Good. Bring the box back to me tomorrow, and I will dispose of it properly. We have to protect our privacy. She hung up before I could reply. The call had lasted less than 20 seconds. The woman who just orchestrated a public humiliation over my paternity was now desperate to stop a simple cheek swab. She was not afraid of William finding out he was not my biological father. She was afraid of the system itself. I dialed my attorney. Dana Mercer picked up on the first ring. She wants the kit back, I told her. Consumer testing is not admissible in court, Dana said. Her tone was clinical, grounding me. If you are looking for legal proof of anything, we need a certified lab with a chain of custody. I just want to know if William is my father. That is the only question I am asking right now. Then swab your cheek. Just remember that opening this door means you cannot close it. We ended the call. I broke the seal on the cardboard box. The plastic vial felt light, almost weightless in my palm. The cotton tip scraped against the inside of my cheek. 15 seconds on the left side, then 15 seconds on the right. I sealed the tube and registered the barcode under my own name. I did not ask the system to look for anyone else. My only goal was to verify my relationship with William. The next morning, I drove 3 towns over and dropped the return package into a postal collection box. Then I went to the hospital, worked a 10-hour shift reviewing patient compliance regulations, and called Dana's assistant. I updated the primary beneficiary on my life insurance policy, removing my parents entirely. Waiting required patience. I had practiced patience for 23 years. I went to work. I ignored 2 more voicemails from my mother. I paid my mortgage. I maintained the boundaries I had built to survive my family. A week passed. I was sitting at my kitchen island drinking black coffee before work. The morning was perfectly quiet. Then my phone chimed. It was a new email notification from the testing company. I set my coffee mug down. The porcelain clicked softly against the stone counter. I opened the message. The subject line consisted of 6 words. You have 2 immediate family matches. My finger hovered over the blue link in the email. The kitchen was perfectly quiet, save for the low hum of the refrigerator. But my pulse echoed loudly in my ears. I clicked the link and logged into the testing portal. The web page is loaded in a grid of bright blue text, displaying 2 names at the top of the screen. William Whitmore. The relationship category listed him as my parent. Sienna Whitmore. The system categorized her as a parent or child. Based on our verified ages and dates of birth, the algorithm had automatically designated my exact relationship to her. Parents. A cold knot tightened at the base of my throat. I pulled the cardboard packaging from my purse and checked the identification number printed on the flap, ensuring it matched the sequence on the screen perfectly. There was no error on my end. My phone buzzed across the counter, vibrating with a demanding FaceTime ringtone. Sienna was calling. I swiped to accept the video call, and her face filled the screen. She looked completely drained of color, her skin holding the chalky paleness of someone who had just witnessed a severe accident. Behind her, our parents sat on their beige living room sofa. There is a mistake, Sienna said. Her voice trembled, lacking its usual confident edge. What mistake? I asked, keeping my tone perfectly level. My account just updated. Sienna turned her laptop camera so I could see her screen, revealing an interface identical to mine. It says you are my mother. You switched the tubes. William closed his eyes, sinking deeper into the sofa cushions. Carol sat completely still, her hands folded neatly in her lap. Instead of arguing, I minimized the video window and dialed the customer support number listed on my results page. I placed the call on speaker so everyone could hear. A representative answered on the second ring, their voice echoing slightly through the kitchen. I asked how the match was generated, and the representative explained the mechanics in plain clinical terms. The system automatically cross-referenced my new sample against existing profiles that had opted into relative matching. William and Sienna had submitted their data 2 years ago during a charity heritage campaign, meaning they were already in the database. I had never requested a direct comparison. The algorithm simply connected the dots. I thanked the representative and ended the call. The silence on the video feed felt absolute. My mother did not look surprised, nor did she ask to see the screens or demand to speak to the company. She simply adjusted her tailored collar. "Those companies ruin families," Carol said. Her tone was completely flat, devoid of any shock. "We did what was best." Sienna stared at the camera for a moment, then turned around to look at our mother. "What did you do?" "We saved you," Carol replied, her voice smooth and practiced. Sienna whipped her attention back to the screen. She focused all her rising panic directly on me. "Why did you not come looking for me?" I looked at the girl who shared my uneven hairline and my nervous habits. The child I had rocked to sleep, believing I was just an older sister filling an empty void. The girl who had mocked me just a week ago. "Because they told a 15-year-old girl that her baby was dead," I said. Sienna opened her mouth, but no sound came out. We did not cry, and we did not offer each other any comfort. The space between us was too full of lies to bridge with a simple apology. "I didn't know," I added, letting the weight of the truth settle in the quiet room. William finally shifted on the sofa, leaning forward to rest his elbows on his knees. "We kept you in the family. It was the only way to protect everyone from a scandal. Did you know I spent 3 years looking for a grave?" I asked him. "Did you know I checked every cemetery in a 50-mile radius looking for a marker with no name?" My father looked down at his expensive leather shoes. He did not answer. I ended the call and immediately dialed Dana Mercer. The attorney answered right away, and I relayed the entire conversation without pausing for breath. Dana moved quickly. She instructed me to take screenshots of the portals and drafted a formal demand to the testing company, requiring them to preserve all digital records. Nobody was allowed to delete their profiles or alter their privacy settings. "Consumer testing is just the first step," Dana told me over the phone. "We need official labs. A certified paternity test with William and a maternity test with Sienna. Strict chain of custody, verified identification, and sealed results." I sent a text to the family group chat outlining Dana's requirements. Sienna replied 3 minutes later. She agreed to the official lab work because she still desperately wanted to prove the consumer system wrong. Later that afternoon, I sat in Dana's office. The heavy mahogany desk was covered with the files I had brought from my safe. The clinic discharge summary sat right in the center, illuminated by the brass desk lamp. Dana picked up the faded paper, adjusting her reading glasses to trace the line of text I had memorized years ago. "Live female infant transferred." She set the document down and looked across the desk at me. The air in the room felt incredibly still. "There should be a death certificate," Dana said. There was not. The fluorescent lights of the certified laboratory hummed a low, steady pitch. William sat in the vinyl waiting chair, staring at the scuffed linoleum floor. The man who raised me looked incredibly frail, refusing to meet my eyes. Across the room, Sienna stood by the reception desk. Her jaw remained tight, and she crossed her arms defensively over her chest. The technician called us back one by one. Official identification required strict verification. Photographs were taken. Cotton swabs went into tamper-evident plastic bags, sealed with thick barcodes. We needed legal proof, and consumer testing meant nothing in a courtroom. After providing her sample, Sienna jammed her driver license back into her wallet and walked out without saying a single word. William followed her, his shoulders slumped in defeat. 2 days later, Dana and I sat in her office, building a physical timeline across her massive oak desk. The manila envelope containing my medical history sat completely empty. Birth records, faded hospital bracelets, and careful notes formed a paper trail spanning 23 years. The attorney picked up a stack of old emails I had printed. "You did not just start digging after the birthday dinner," Dana observed, adjusting her wire-rimmed glasses. "I needed facts," I replied, tracing the edge of the smooth wooden desk. "My family told me I was crazy whenever I asked questions, so I started keeping receipts. Maintaining my routine kept me grounded." I drove to the hospital on Monday morning and focused entirely on patient compliance protocols. Around noon, the head of security knocked on my office frame. My mother had called the main switchboard, claiming a family emergency and demanding my exact schedule. The security team, well aware of my strict privacy requests, refused to transfer the call or confirm my presence. My boundaries were not a recent development, and they held firm against the pressure. My mother realized she could not reach me directly, so she immediately changed her strategy. During my lunch break, my phone buzzed with a forwarded message from a former colleague at Safe Beginnings. Carol had sent an internal memo to the entire charity staff. The email expressed deep concern for my mental well-being, citing grief-triggered confusion regarding my long-lost child. A few minutes later, Sienna shared a public article on her social media feed about biological obsession destroying adoptive families. My chest tightened, a familiar heavy pressure pushing against my ribs. Arguing would only validate their narrative. Taking quiet screenshots of every post and memo, I emailed the files directly to Dana and went back to reviewing hospital regulations. Later that evening, Dana called me on my drive home. The Bluetooth speaker in my car carried her crisp voice over the heavy sound of highway traffic. "I looked into the invoice you found," Dana said. "The one from 6 weeks after the delivery. I remembered discovering that folded piece of paper 10 years ago, digging through William's home office while he was recovering from gallbladder surgery. Searching for his insurance documents had uncovered a bill for a relative placement consultation instead. The memory of confronting him still burned, recalling how quickly he had snatched the paper away and told me to stop invading his privacy. The firm on that letterhead specialized exclusively in private and kinship adoptions," Dana explained. "They dissolved 15 years ago, but my investigator tracked down their old court filings. Rain started hitting my windshield, blurring the bright headlights of oncoming cars. The wipers dragged across the glass with a heavy squeak. The researcher found a sealed docket in the county archives," Dana continued, her tone sharpening. "A kinship adoption case opened exactly 2 weeks after your delivery. The petitioner listed an address matching the house where you grew up." My hands gripped the leather steering wheel. The consumer DNA had connected the biological dots, but this legal record proved the lie was premeditated. My mother had not just taken advantage of a medical tragedy. She had manufactured a legal cover-up. Before I could process the massive weight of that realization, my phone beeped loudly, indicating an incoming call on the other line. The caller ID displayed Helen Ward, the board president of Safe Beginnings. "Hold on, Dana," I said, switching the active lines. "Helen, what is going on?" The older woman was breathing heavily, her voice echoing as if she were pacing quickly in an empty room. "Someone just logged into the charity archive server," Helen said. "They are actively deleting the old placement files." By 9 o'clock the next morning, Dana Mercer had drafted emergency preservation notices. She sent formal legal demands to Safe Beginnings, the dissolved law firm, and the county archive, strictly prohibiting the destruction of any physical or digital records. Helen Ward acted just as quickly on the charity board side, locking my mother out of the main administrative network. I requested a full extraction of the cloud access logs because we needed to track exactly what Carol had managed to delete the night before. My phone vibrated against the edge of my desk at the hospital. Sienna's name flashed across the dark screen. I answered the call, and her ragged breathing immediately filled the earpiece. She demanded the access codes to my secure digital vault. I refused without hesitation. Sending sensitive legal files over a standard text message was incredibly careless, and I told her to bring whatever she had found directly to the law firm. Sienna asked if she could stay at my townhouse for a few days. I told her no. Maintaining that boundary felt heavy, but I knew my mother would twist any sudden cohabitation into a kidnapping accusation. Sienna arrived at the polished reception area of Dana's office an hour later. She looked exhausted, carrying a familiar velvet box with worn blue corners. Sitting across from the heavy mahogany desk, the younger woman started talking fast. She had confronted our mother that morning, asking to see the original adoption papers. Carol had completely ignored the question, launching instead into a tirade about how I was manipulating the DNA results to steal the family reputation. She did not even ask how I felt. Sienna whispered, staring at the blue velvet. She just wanted to know what I had told you. The attorney poured a glass of water and pushed it across the desk. Sienna ignored the glass and explained how she had waited for Carol to go out to the garden. Years ago, my mother had shown her the blue box inside the wall safe, claiming the hospital bracelet inside belonged to the baby I had lost. Sienna punched her own birth date into the keypad, and the heavy steel door clicked open. Inside, she found the bracelet, a thick envelope from the old law firm, and a copy of a legal relinquishment document bearing my name. Sienna pulled her phone from her pocket and placed it on the desk. She had taken high-resolution photographs of the paperwork before Carol could catch her. The timestamp and location data were perfectly preserved in the image metadata. She had just finished capturing the notary seal and the margins when Carol walked into the study. Our mother had caught her holding the old hospital band, completely unaware of the digital evidence sitting in the phone. "Everything I did made you my daughter," Sienna said, mimicking our mother's exact tone. The digital photos were a massive breakthrough, but the real devastation was sitting inside the blue velvet box. Dana put on a pair of latex gloves. The thin rubber snapped sharply against her wrists. She opened the velvet lid and pulled out the yellowed plastic band. The printed numbers were faded, but completely legible. Dana placed the bracelet right next to the hospital discharge summary I had retrieved from my safe. The identification codes matched perfectly. The date matched perfectly. The birth weight matched perfectly. I reached into my leather tote bag and pulled out an original health evaluation form from my high school records. My authentic signature sat in bright blue ink at the bottom of the page. Dana placed the phone displaying Sienna's photo right next to the real document. The attorney promised to send the files to a forensic handwriting expert for a preliminary analysis, clarifying that we still needed the sealed original for a final legal conclusion. The copy was just enough to cast reasonable doubt. The remaining color drained entirely from Sienna's face. She pressed a hand over her mouth, jumped out of the heavy leather chair, and ran down the hallway. The solid oak door of the restroom slammed shut, and a moment later, the harsh sound of retching echoed through the wood. I walked down the corridor and stood outside the bathroom. The polished marble floor chilled the soles of my shoes. I did not go inside. I did not hold her hair or rub her back. The DNA results proved I gave birth to her, but biology did not instantly erase 23 years of distance. I leaned against the wall and simply waited for the sound of running water. The lock clicked a few minutes later. Sienna walked slowly back to the mahogany desk. She reached out and picked up the faded plastic band, tracing the sharp edges with her thumb. "Did you ever hold me?" I looked at the faded plastic band resting on the heavy mahogany desk. My throat felt incredibly thick, completely dry from the recycled air in the law office. Sienna sat across from me, her eyes wide and red-rimmed, waiting for an answer to her question. "Did you ever hold me?" "No," I answered. My voice sounded hollow in the quiet room. "They told me you were dead before I even opened my eyes." Sienna dropped her gaze to her lap, her fingers twisting the fabric of her coat. The reality of her origin was finally crushing the fairy tale she had been fed. "What do you remember?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. I closed my eyes and let the memory pull me backward. I remember the smell of iodine and cheap bleach. The cotton sheets were rough against my legs. There was a short cry, just a few seconds of sound, bright and loud. Then my mother leaned over the bed. She pushed my shoulders down against the mattress, holding me flat while the nurses rushed out of the room. When the medication wore off, Carol sat in a vinyl chair next to the bed and told me your lungs had failed during the transfer to the main hospital. The young woman sitting across from me pulled her knees tightly to her chest. Understanding finally broke through the narrative she had memorized. I had never abandoned her, and I had never chosen to walk away. "She taught me to hate you," Sienna cried, a tear slipping down her pale cheek. I did not reach across the desk to wipe it away. "Mom told me you were jealous because I was the chosen child. She said you resented my happiness, so I just did what she wanted to protect myself." "You were taught to hurt me," I agreed, watching her face carefully. "But you kept doing it after you were old enough to know it was wrong." Sienna flinched, looking away toward the rainy window. I leaned forward, refusing to let her hide behind our mother's shadow. "You took credit for my campaign proposals at Safe Beginnings without a second thought. You spent the charity funds on personal trips. And you chose to slide that testing kit across the table at my birthday dinner. Carol gave you the script, but you were the one who smiled and read the lines. I wanted her to love me, Sienna pleaded. Her hands shook violently. She only loved me when I was proving I belonged to her. The DNA says I gave birth to you, I told her, making sure my words carried absolute finality. It does not give me the right to demand that you love me. And it does not give you a free pass for the cruelty you actively participated in. The silence in the office grew incredibly heavy. Dana sat quietly near the bookshelves, giving us the space to dismantle 2 decades of careful lies. Sienna wiped her face with the back of her trembling hand. If you hated how I treated you, why did you always fix my mistakes at work? Why did you keep helping me when everyone else turned away? I looked at the way she chewed on the inside of her cheek. The gesture mirrored my own anxious habit perfectly. Because you looked like me, I admitted. The confession burned my throat. You had my exact hairline. You chewed your lip when you were nervous. When you were little, rocking you to sleep was the only thing that brought me any genuine peace. My mother told me I was projecting my grief onto my adopted sister, and I believed her. I thought my mind was broken, trying to turn you into a ghost. A sharp knock on the heavy oak door interrupted the quiet room. Before Dana could answer, the brass handle turned, and William stepped inside. My father wore a wrinkled golf shirt and a desperate, exhausted expression. He smelled faintly of stale coffee and nervous sweat. He had never looked so frail. His shoulders hunched deeply under the weight of the secrets finally catching up to his quiet life. "Leah," William said, taking a hesitant step into the room. "We need to talk privately. Just the 2 of us." I remained seated and gestured toward the empty leather chair next to Sienna. "Dana and Sienna are staying right here. You can sit down, and you can speak to all of us, or you can turn around and leave." He hesitated, his eyes darting frantically toward the attorney, but eventually he sank down into the chair. His weathered hands shook as he rested them on his knees. "I need you to tell me the truth," I demanded. "No more deflecting." William swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing in his throat. I knew the baby lived. The admission hung in the air, toxic and heavy. Hearing the words out loud changed everything. "You signed the adoption papers," I pressed, refusing to let him look at the floor. "Your mother said it was the only way to protect our family," he mumbled. "She handled the lawyers and the clinic staff. I just paid the bills and signed my name where they told me to." "You knew I was looking for a grave," I reminded him, my voice rising slightly. "You watched me mourn a child that was sleeping in the bedroom right down the hall. Did you ever see me sign a relinquishment form willingly?" "No," William whispered. "I did not." He reached out, his trembling fingers stretching across the desk for my hand, but I pulled my arm away. Telling the truth now was not a gift. It was simply a confession, extracted under immense pressure. Sienna reached into her coat pocket and pulled out her phone. Her hands were shaking just as badly as William's. She unlocked the bright screen and slid the device across the desk toward Dana. "Mom did not ask me to bring the testing kit to the restaurant as a joke," Sienna confessed, her voice barely audible. "She planned the whole thing weeks ago." Dana picked up the phone and scrolled through a long text message thread between Sienna and Carol. The attorney adjusted her glasses and began reading the messages aloud, her tone clinical and detached. "Make her stop asking about old files," Dana read. She swiped her finger to the next blue bubble. "Once everyone sees she is not William's biological child, nobody will believe a single word she says." The birthday dinner had never been about simple humiliation. My mother had felt me getting closer to the truth, tracking the old hospital records and asking uncomfortable questions about the past. The testing kit was a calculated defensive maneuver. Carol wanted to discredit my sanity and destroy my reputation in front of the charity board before I could expose the adoption fraud. Just as Dana finished reading the text thread, the phone screen lit up with an incoming call. The caller ID displayed Carol's name in bold black letters. Sienna lunged forward, snatching the device out of the attorney's hands. She did not answer the call, letting it vibrate against the wood until it went to voicemail. A few seconds later, an audio transcription notification popped onto the lock screen. Because Carol was leaving the message directly on the mobile network, the automated text preview appeared in real time, translating her voice into black text. I leaned over the desk, my eyes scanning the glowing words. "Your father is panicking," the transcription read. Leah refused to sign then. "Do not let her destroy us now." The sentence froze the air in my lungs. Leah refused to sign then. My mother had just admitted in her own voice that the legal relinquishment document sitting in her wall safe was a complete forgery. Before Dana could read the rest of the transcription, Sienna flipped the phone face down against the mahogany wood. The plastic case hit the desk with a sharp smack. "Give me the phone, Sienna," Dana instructed, her voice calm but carrying absolute authority. The young woman kept her hand pressed firmly against the back of the device. She shook her head, fresh tears spilling over her eyelashes. Handing over the phone meant surrendering her entire life. It meant losing her luxury apartment paid for by the charity, losing her position as the director of communications, and publicly betraying the woman who had provided her with every privilege she had ever known. "I cannot," Sienna cried. "She will take everything away from me." I watched her grip the edges of the phone, desperate to hold on to the comfortable lies. She was a victim of my mother's manipulation. But at this exact moment, she was making a conscious choice to protect the abuser. Dana folded her hands over the legal pad on her desk. "Your phone may be the difference between a family secret and an organized cover-up," Dana warned. Sienna pulled the device off the table and slid it deep into her coat pocket, pulling the heavy fabric tightly around herself. The boardroom table felt like a cold altar in the center of a courtroom. Helen Ward presided at the head of the long, polished surface, her posture rigid. My mother sat opposite the board members, flanked by a high-priced attorney who smelled of aggressive cologne. Carol wore a silk blouse, her expression carefully curated to reflect wounded dignity. She did not look at me, she did not look at Sienna. "This is a private family dispute," Carol told the board, her voice steady. "Leah is going through a difficult time, and she is projecting that grief onto our organization." I kept my hands folded on the table, refusing to give her the reaction she expected. Dana sat beside me, flipping through a file of documents. "We did not need to win the war today. We only needed to puncture the narrative Carol had spent 23 years building." "This is not about family," Helen said, her gaze fixed on my mother. "This is about the integrity of safe beginnings." My mother sighed and reached into a briefcase. She pulled out a heavy, cream-colored document and slid it toward the center of the table. "Leah claims I kidnapped my own granddaughter. This is a contemporaneous copy of the relinquishment document signed by Leah herself on the day of her daughter's birth." William, sitting in the corner, buried his face in his hands. Carol's attorney spoke with smooth confidence, suggesting I was attempting to rewrite history for financial gain. Sienna stood up. Her chair scraped loudly against the hardwood. She reached into her pocket, pulled out her phone, and placed it on the table. "Everything she told me to say is in there," Sienna whispered. Dana stepped in, her voice clinical. She presented the metadata screenshots from the photographs Sienna had taken in the study, proving the relinquishment document had been hidden in our mother's safe long before the birthday party. Dana also presented the handwriting expert's preliminary assessment. The signature showed features consistent with tracing from my high school medical record, although a final conclusion would require access to the sealed original. The room grew silent. The mother I knew would have stood up and screamed, but the woman sitting across from me simply froze, her practiced smile finally cracking like cheap porcelain. Helen leaned forward, her eyes narrowing as she reviewed the log of charity expenditures Dana had also submitted, detailing thousands of dollars in organization funds spent on personal travel and luxury items. "You have been using this organization as a private bank account for years," Helen said. Sienna unlocked her phone and tapped the screen, playing the voicemail my mother had left after our office meeting. The recording was crystal clear, filling the room with Carol's panicked tone. "Your father is panicking," the voicemail echoed. "Leah refused to sign then. Do not let her destroy us now." The phrase hung in the air like a death sentence. My mother had just confessed, in her own voice, that the relinquishment form she had presented to the board was a total fabrication. She had tripped over her own desperate need to control the outcome. I looked at Carol then. For the first time, I did not see the powerful woman who controlled my world. I saw someone who had spent decades terrified that she was not enough. "Carol," Helen said, her voice devoid of warmth. "You are suspended effective immediately. We are launching an independent audit of every file in this office." My mother did not look at me. She did not try to defend herself. Instead, she stared at Sienna with such cold betrayal that the muscles across my shoulders tightened. The golden child had finally stopped following the script. As the meeting dissolved, I walked out of the boardroom without saying a word. Outside, the afternoon air was crisp. I took a deep breath, feeling the heavy pressure in my chest finally beginning to lift. I had a job to go back to, a townhouse waiting for me, and a life that was finally my own. I did not know what would happen to Sienna, and I did not know how long the audit would take, but the power she had held over my identity was gone. I sat in the driver's seat of my car for a long time, watching the sun dip behind the city skyline. My phone buzzed again with a message from Dana. The county attorney had been contacted regarding the fraud. I started the engine and drove home in the dark. For the first time in 38 years, I was not anticipating the next move in a game I had never wanted to play. I was just driving home, and for tonight, that was enough. My mother did not retreat into silence. By the next morning, the local news cycle was already vibrating with her frantic narrative. Carol appeared in a carefully staged video, sitting in front of a bookshelf with her hair pulled back into a severe, understated bun. She spoke about being betrayed by two daughters who had become consumed by greed and a desire for fame. She did not mention the forgery, the charity funds, or the DNA results. She simply framed herself as a heartbroken mother facing a malicious, coordinated attack. My phone became a source of constant, grating noise. Notifications flooded my screen from morning until night, ranging from aggressive insults sent by anonymous strangers to concerned inquiries from distant acquaintances. I muted every alert. Walking into the hospital that day felt like stepping onto a stage where everyone was already watching. Colleagues whispered behind piles of charts, and patients glanced up from their magazines with curiosity. The weight of the situation threatened to crush my professional composure, but I walked directly to my department head's office. I had built my reputation on logic, regulation, and evidence. By the time I reached my desk, I had gathered the internal security logs and personal email correspondence that clearly distinguished my professional conduct from my family crisis. I sat down with my department head and handed her a thick folder. I did not apologize. I simply explained that my family was currently under an external audit, and I had ensured no hospital resources or sensitive patient data were ever compromised. She looked through the documents, listened to my explanation, and eventually nodded. My career remained intact because I had spent decades keeping my two lives separate. While I maintained my stability, Sienna's world had completely fractured. The Safe Beginnings Board stripped her of her role as the director of communications. Her professional reputation was tied entirely to Carol's image, and as the charity collapsed, so did her career. The wealthy donors who used to praise her at brunch suddenly found themselves far too busy to return her calls. The landlord of the luxury apartment she rented in the city issued an eviction notice when the charity credit card stopped processing payments. She was essentially stranded, holding a phone full of incriminating evidence but possessing no real path forward. She called me from a sidewalk in the middle of the afternoon, the heavy sound of city traffic drowning out her words. I told her to come to the downtown library where I could meet her in a public space, refusing to let her come to my townhouse. We sat on a cold stone bench outside the library. Sienna looked smaller than I had ever seen her. Her designer clothes looked out of place against the gray concrete of the public square. "I have nowhere to go," she whispered, twisting her fingers until the knuckles turned white. "You can find a short-term rental," I said, keeping my voice neutral. "I can help you find a job listing, but you have to start paying your own way." "Mom is saying you paid the board members to lie," Sienna said, her voice cracking. I looked at her, seeing the girl who was still struggling to let go of the protection our mother had once provided. "She is lying to save herself. You know the truth because you have the voicemail on your phone." Sienna stayed in a budget motel across town that evening. It was a stark contrast to the life she had enjoyed, but it was the only reality she could afford. I did not offer her money. I did not offer her a place in my life beyond basic logistical support. Healing was not something I could facilitate, and she had to learn how to exist without Carol's influence before we could ever hope to have a genuine connection. The situation became even more complex when two other women contacted Dana's office. They were former clients of Safe Beginnings, young mothers who had been coerced into signing documents they did not fully understand. One woman provided a statement detailing how Carol had forced her to sign a waiver while she was recovering from a difficult delivery and heavily medicated. The stories aligned with the pattern of behavior that defined my mother's career. She did not operate out of malice for the children. She operated out of a fundamental belief that she was the only one capable of deciding what was best for everyone else. I felt a sudden, sharp coldness in my marrow when I received the digital notification from Dana the next afternoon. The attorney had sent me a set of photographs recovered from the office security cameras. I opened the files on my laptop, the screen illuminating the dim interior of my home office. The images showed Carol entering the administrative wing of the charity after hours, moving with a desperate, hurried pace. She was holding a large cardboard box labeled Whitmore Placement. Her face was obscured by the shadows in the hallway, but her posture told the entire story. She stopped in front of the high-speed shredder that sat in the corner of the staff room. She stayed there for 20 minutes, methodically feeding document after document into the machine. I watched the screen, feeling the blood drain from my face. This was not just about the adoption papers. This was about everything she had done to maintain her facade. The cloud backup files Dana had already secured confirmed that the names of the documents Carol destroyed included years of financial records and original correspondence with the clinic staff. I zoomed in on one of the photos. The box was sitting open on the floor next to her boots. It was filled to the brim with manila folders. My mother had decided that if she could not control the narrative, she would simply erase the physical existence of the evidence. I stared at the screen until my eyes burned, realizing that the destruction of those files had likely crossed the line from a civil dispute into a criminal investigation. I sent the files to Dana, knowing the attorney would forward them to the authorities before the sun rose the next morning. I sat in the dark for a long time, listening to the rain tap against the glass. The woman I had called mother was now systematically destroying the life she had built. I had wanted the truth for so long, and now that it was finally here, it was colder and harder than I ever could have imagined. I was no longer fighting for my own past. I was watching the architect of my life disassemble everything, piece by piece, until there was nothing left to stand on. Dana filed for limited access to the sealed adoption record the next morning. The request did not ask the court to rewrite anyone's family overnight. It asked for permission to examine documents directly connected to my birth, Sienna's adoption, and the disputed relinquishment form. Carol's attorney responded with a settlement offer before the hearing date was even assigned. The offer included money, a private apology, and reimbursement for my legal expenses. In exchange, I would withdraw the petition. Sienna would refuse to cooperate with the audit. Safe Beginnings would handle the missing funds internally. Dana placed the offer on her desk between us. "They think this is about compensation," she said. I pushed the papers back toward her. "It is about correcting the record." William contacted Dana 2 days later. He had left Carol's house and moved into a hotel near the medical center. He wanted to cooperate, but he also wanted me to understand that he had been afraid of losing his marriage. I did not meet with him alone. Inside Dana's conference room, William signed a sworn statement admitting that he had known my baby survived. He confirmed, "I should have stopped her," he said. "Telling the truth now is not a gift," I answered. "It is the first debt you have finally agreed to pay." The court hearing took place several weeks later. It was not dramatic. There was no crowded gallery and no instant judgment. Dana explained the DNA results, the missing death certificate, the conflicting medical records, and the document Carol had presented to the charity board. Carol's attorney argued that opening the file would violate the privacy of an adoption completed more than 2 decades ago. Then Sienna stood. She wore a plain gray dress and carried none of the polished confidence she once used at charity events. The judge asked whether she understood that the records could permanently change the legal history she had known all her life. "Yes," Sienna said. Carol turned toward her. "You do not know what you are doing." For once, Sienna did not look to Carol for permission. "Unseal it," she said. The judge did not release the file publicly. The court ordered controlled access for the attorneys, the adult adoptee, the biological mother, and an approved document examiner. The original records remained inside the courthouse archive. Several days later, Dana and I entered a secure records room. Carol's attorney sat across from us. A court clerk placed the original adoption file on the table and instructed everyone not to remove or alter a single page. The original relinquishment form matched the photographs Sienna had taken from Carol's safe. The document examiner studied it under magnification. He compared the signature with my high school medical form, the maternity residence intake papers, and later samples of my handwriting. His final report confirmed what the preliminary review had suggested. The signature had been mechanically copied or carefully traced from my school record. The pressure patterns did not match natural handwriting. Several connecting strokes ended in the same unnatural positions as the older signature. The file contained more. A note claimed that the minor mother had declined a direct placement discussion, but there was no record showing that any independent counselor had spoken with me alone. Another page showed that the prospective adoptive parents had requested no direct contact between me and the baby. Carol and William had not rescued an abandoned child. They had requested that I be kept away. Sienna's temporary placement records included her original hospital identification number. It matched the number on the infant bracelet. There was no death certificate, no transfer record showing an infant death, and no document proving I had been informed of an adoption. Dana closed the file slowly. "This does not finish every legal question," she said. "But it ends their ability to claim you willingly disappeared." The document examiner's report, William's sworn statement, the voicemail, the financial audit, and the security footage were sent to the appropriate investigators. The legal process would take time. Carol would not be sentenced in a single afternoon, but the story she had sold for 23 years could no longer survive contact with its own records. 8 months after my birthday dinner, I sat behind the wheel outside the open iron gates of Safe Beginnings. Sienna sat in the passenger seat beside me, tracing her thumb over the old hospital bracelet. Beyond the windshield, a maintenance crew unscrewed the heavy bronze letters from the brick facade. Their drills whined through the quiet morning until the name Carol Whitmore dropped into a waiting cardboard box with a sharp, final metallic clink. After the audit findings and the court-ordered review confirmed the extent of the deception, the charity board permanently removed my mother from her role. Without her reputation to shield the organization, the major donors vanished overnight, and the audit revealed the extent of the missing funds. She had spent 2 decades curating a legacy built on the stolen choices of young women, and in a single season, the foundation had completely collapsed. The criminal investigation into the document forgery and the destruction of the archive files was already moving toward formal charges. She would face the legal system not as a powerful community pillar, but as a woman who had tried to erase the truth with a shredder. Sienna watched from the passenger seat as the last letter hit the bottom of the box. She had resigned from her position, had begun repaying the misappropriated funds through a demanding job in a mid-level communication firm, and started the long process of trauma therapy. She no longer had the luxury of the life Carol had constructed for her, and she had stopped looking for someone to blame. "I still have the bracelet," Sienna said, her voice quiet. I glanced at her, noticing the way she held herself. The fragile, panicked girl who had sat in the law office was beginning to harden into someone entirely new. I looked away from the empty wall, the weight of the last 8 months finally settling into a manageable reality. I had not taken the director position the board offered me, and I had not accepted any part of the family empire. I remained at the hospital, content in my work, and dedicated my spare time to. William had moved into a small, supervised apartment complex across the city. His health was failing, and the quiet existence he now occupied was a world away from the mansion he once shared with Carol. I provided him with a list of professional care services, but I refused to manage his medications or take him to his appointments. I had spent enough of my life playing the responsible witness to my mother's performance. I refused to do it for him. My phone rang inside my leather bag. It was a call from a number I had not saved, but the tone was unmistakable. I knew it was her. I let it go to voicemail. A moment later, the transcription appeared on my screen. "After everything I did for this family, You owe me one conversation, Carol said, her voice sounding thin and desperate through the digital filter. I read the text, my face reflecting in the black glass of the screen. My mother still operated under the delusion that she was the architect of our lives. You built a family by stealing everyone else's choices, I said aloud to the empty air. I do not owe you another one. I deleted the message and put the phone away. Later that afternoon, the sun warmed the hardwood floors of my townhouse. The space felt different now, lighter and entirely mine. Sienna arrived at the front door, carrying a small, polished wooden box. She walked into the living area and set the container on the coffee table. Inside, resting on a bed of silk, was the old hospital bracelet she had retrieved from her belongings. She looked at me, her expression guarded but present. She still addressed me by my first name, and I was grateful for that distance. We were two strangers who happened to share a DNA sequence and a painful, tangled history. Can you tell me what you remember about the day I was born? Sienna asked. The question did not cut as deep as it once had. I walked over to the sofa and sat down, opening the door wider to let the breeze from the balcony sweep into the room. I looked at the young woman sitting across from me, seeing the traces of a past I had almost lost forever. The truth was not a cure, and it did not fix the years of silence. But it was the only foundation we had left. Everything they could not make me forget, I said. I reached out, and for the first time I took her hand. It was a small, fragile start, but it was real. I had survived the erasure, the forgery, and the cold, calculated cruelty that had defined our lives. The architecture of their lies had fallen, leaving us standing in the open air, finally able to breathe on our own terms. I closed my eyes, listening to the sound of the city outside, knowing that for the first time in 38 years, I was exactly where I was meant to be. You have watched how a lifetime of secrets can be dismantled, not by a grand miracle, but by the relentless, quiet accumulation of evidence. The most important lesson to take from this story is that your personal history belongs to you alone, and no one, not even those who claim to love you, has the right to decide which parts of your identity are worth keeping. When someone insists that their version of your life is the truth, they are not protecting you, they are controlling you. You must realize that maintaining your own records, protecting your financial independence, and establishing firm, unyielding boundaries are not acts of selfishness. They are the essential tools required to survive those who use affection as a weapon to demand your silence. Healing does not require immediate forgiveness, and it certainly does not require you to mend a family dynamic that was built on theft and deception. You are allowed to walk away from a legacy that was designed to diminish your voice. Justice is not always found in a courtroom or a dramatic confrontation. Often, it is found in the simple, brave act of choosing to define your own reality, even when everyone around you insists that you are seeing things that do not exist. You deserve a life where you do not have to fight for the validity of your own memories. If you are currently feeling trapped by a family story that feels like a costume you were forced to wear, I want you to ask yourself, what is one piece of your own life that you have been waiting to reclaim, and how would your existence change if you finally refused to let anyone else tell your story for you?